They told her to step out of the line. Not quietly. Not privately. The words cut across gate B12 like a snapped cable, loud enough to turn heads, sharp enough to stop breath. A rolling suitcase clattered to a halt. A crying child went summed mid-whimper. Even the mechanical voice over the loudspeaker seemed to hesitate, as if the terminal itself had leaned in to listen. Maya Reynolds did not move. She stood there with her boarding pass in her right hand, passport in her left, coat still unbuttoned because she had been running. Not jogging. Running. Her chest rose and fell too fast. A thin line of sweat traced the curve of her temple and disappeared into her hair. Her eyes flicked once to the departure screen above the gate. London. On time. Still on time. Barely. "Ma'am," the gate agent said again, louder now. "I need you to step aside." The agent's name tag read Karen Holt. Mid-40s. Perfect bun pulled so tight it flattened every stray thought into obedience. Her uniform was immaculate, navy pressed into sharp lines, like rules that had never been questioned. She didn't look at the boarding pass. She didn't need to. She was already looking past Maya, scanning for the next body that fit her idea of order. Maya swallowed. Her throat was dry. "I'm boarding first class," she said. Her voice was steady, but it cost her something. "Seat 2, eh?" Karen exhaled through her nose, a sound of practiced irritation. She leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and finally let her eyes travel over Maya properly. The beige trench coat, sensible shoes, the tote bag slung over one shoulder, worn at the edges. No designer logo screaming for attention. No entourage. No visible markers of importance. Karen's mouth tightened. This lane is for priority passengers only. "I know," Maya said. She held out the boarding pass. "Closer this time." Closer to Karen's face. "That's what this is." Karen took the pass between two fingers, not to scan it, but to inspect it. She tilted it under the fluorescent lights, as if looking for invisible cracks. Her eyes narrowed at the name. Maya Reynolds. She read it silently, lips moving just enough to notice. Reynolds. Not a name that came with automatic respect in her world. Behind Maya, the line shifted. Someone sighed. A man in a suit checked his watch. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it should have. "Where are you headed tonight, Ms. Reynolds?" Karen asked. "London. For work or pleasure?" The question sounded harmless. It wasn't. Maya felt the pressure building behind her eyes. The image came uninvited. A hospital room half a world away, white lights, a small chest rising unevenly, a monitor screaming when it shouldn't. She forced herself to stay here in the terminal under the hum of artificial air and judgment. "For work," she said. "I'm a neurosurgeon. There's a child waiting for surgery." Karen laughed. It was quick, sharp, disbelieving. "That's a new one." A few heads turned again. Maya felt heat creep up her neck. Karen shook her head and dropped the boarding pass onto the counter. Not slid. Dropped. "We've had a lot of issues today. System glitches, duplicate bookings, fraud. So I'm going to need to verify this manually." Maya stared at the pass where it lay, face down, like something unclean. The flight boards in 20 minutes. Karen's fingers were already moving across the keyboard. Aggressive, final. Then you should have arrived earlier. I got here as fast as I could, Maya said. Her voice cracked just slightly. She hated that it did. If I miss this flight, a 6-year-old girl dies. Silence spread outward from the counter. Thick, heavy. People were listening now. Not openly. Not yet. But they were listening. Karen didn't look up. People always say that, she said. It's usually a dying grandmother, or a business deal. She glanced up then, eyes cold. You really need better material. You people. The words sat there without being spoken. Maya heard them anyway. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her teeth. She wanted to scream. She wanted to grab the counter and shake it until Karen saw her. Until she saw the nights without sleep. The blood on gloves. The years it took to earn a title that apparently meant nothing here. I paid for that seat, Maya said. I belong on that plane. Karen reached for the phone. That was when the man in the grey hoodie stood up. He had been sitting in the corner near the charging station, half hidden by a pillar plastered with airline ads promising comfort and dignity. His hoodie was faded, the sleeves stretched at the cuffs. His jeans were worn at the knee. A paper bag with a half-eaten bagel rested on the seat beside him. He looked like a man killing time between flights. Nothing more. He moved without hurry. As he crossed the floor, the sound of his footsteps barely registered against the terminal noise, but something shifted anyway. A subtle tightening. A sense not of danger, but of attention being redirected. "Scan the ticket," he said. Karen snapped her head toward him. "Sir, this does not concern you." "It concerns me," the man said. His voice was low, calm. It carried without effort. "Scan the ticket." Karen's lips curled. "I don't explain myself to economy passengers." The word economy landed like a slap. A few people inhaled sharply. Maya turned, startled, and looked at the man properly for the first time. He met her eyes for just a second, long enough to register the fear there, the urgency. Something else, too. Resolve. Then Karen slammed the phone down on the counter. "Security," she said into the receiver. "I have 2 unruly passengers at gate B12. Maya's stomach dropped. The sound of approaching consequences echoed louder than any announcement. She thought of the girl again, the way time closed in like a fist. The man in the hoodie didn't raise his voice. He didn't flinch. He stepped closer to the podium, close enough now that Karen had to look up at him. "You're making a mistake," he said. Karen laughed. A thin, brittle sound. "The only mistake I made was not calling them sooner." The man reached into his pocket. Several people tensed. A woman gasped. Someone lifted a phone. He pulled out a small black wallet. Maya watched, confused, heart hammering, as he opened it and placed something on the counter between them. It wasn't a credit card. It wasn't identification in any form Karen recognized at first glance. It was heavy. Metal. A badge, thick and matte, with a gold crest that caught the overhead lights and threw them back hard. The scanner beneath it came alive. Not a beep, a chime. Deep, resonant. Wrong for this gate. The monitor behind Karen flickered. Blue, then red. Solid red. White letters burned onto the screen. System override. Karen's face drained of color so fast it looked unreal. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. The terminal noise fell away, and the man in the hoodie leaned in, his voice quiet enough that only she could hear it. "I am not passenger 45C, he said. "I am the man who decides whether this plane leaves the ground." Maya felt the air leave her lungs. The story had just begun. The red screen pulsed once, slow and deliberate, like a heartbeat asserting control. Karen Holt stared at it as if it might disappear if she blinked hard enough. Her fingers hovered uselessly above the keyboard. The phone slipped from her hand and clattered against the counter, the sound far too loud in the sudden hush that had swallowed Gate B12 whole. Conversations nearby died mid-sentence. The air felt heavier, charged, as though the terminal itself had been sealed off from the rest of the world. "That's not possible," Karen whispered. Her voice had lost its edge. It sounded thin now, exposed. "This has to be some kind of prank." The man in the grey hoodie didn't move. He stood with one hand resting lightly on the counter, the other relaxed at his side. Close enough now for Karen to notice the small details she'd missed before. The stillness in his posture, the absence of nervous energy, the way his eyes never darted, never searched for approval. "It's not a prank," he said. "And you should step back." Karen didn't. She couldn't. Her mind scrambled for an explanation that didn't end her career. Hack, fake badge, terrorism. Anything that returned control to her hands. She straightened, desperation stiffening her spine. "You hacked the system," she said, louder now, reaching for volume when authority slipped. "That's a federal crime. I'm calling airport police." "You already did," the man said. Footsteps echoed from the far end of the concourse. Fast, heavy, boots on tile. Heads turned as 3 TSA agents and 2 airport police officers pushed through the gathering crowd, radios crackling, hands near belts. The optics snapped into place instantly. A black woman standing tense at the counter, a disheveled man behind it, a frantic gate agent gesturing wildly. "There," Karen said, pointing, relief flooding her features. "He's the one. He accessed restricted systems. He's dangerous." Maya felt a hand tighten around her chest. She looked at the officers, then back at the man beside her. He hadn't stepped away. He hadn't raised his hands. He simply watched them approach, eyes steady, expression unreadable. "Sir," the lead officer said, already moving in, "step away from the podium. Hands where I can see them." The man complied slowly, deliberately. Palms open. Calm. Not submissive. Controlled. "Get him," Karen said, her voice cracking with urgency. "He has a fake badge." The officer grabbed the man by the shoulder and spun him around. and froze, because in turning him, he also turned himself. His line of sight landed squarely on the monitor behind the podium. The red screen still glowed, pulsing softly, but now a smaller window had opened in the corner. A live video feed. A room full of screens. People moving fast. A seal at the top of the frame. The operations control center. A voice boomed from the speakers before anyone could speak. "Officer Grant, stand down. Immediately." The officer's grip loosened as if the fabric beneath his fingers had gone hot. He stared at the screen, then back at the man he'd grabbed. Recognition hit him in stages. The jawline, the eyes, the face he'd seen during mandatory briefings, on internal memos, on magazine covers in the break room. "Sir," he stammered, stepping back. "Mr. Whitmore." Daniel Whitmore adjusted the shoulder of his hoodie where it had been pulled. "Good evening, officer." Karen's knees buckled. She caught herself on the edge of the counter, nails digging into laminate. "That's impossible," she said, almost to herself. He was eating a bagel. Daniel didn't look at her. He reached over, pressed a button on the intercom. The soft chime cut through the silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice filled the gate area, clear and unhurried. "This is Daniel Whitmore, Chief Executive Officer of North Atlantic Air." A collective gasp rippled through. Through the crowd, phones rose higher. Someone whispered his name like a prayer or a curse. "I apologize for the delay," Daniel continued. "We pride ourselves on professionalism, dignity, and judgment. Tonight, we failed." Maya stood frozen, the words washing over her in disbelief. Her knees felt weak. Her hands shook. She hadn't realized how close she'd come to breaking until now. "Dr. Reynolds," Daniel said, turning toward her. She flinched at the sound of her name. "Please step forward." She did, legs heavy, breath shallow. The counter felt farther away than it should have. Daniel typed a short command into the terminal. The printer whirred. A boarding pass slid out, thicker than usual, edged in gold. There was a discrepancy, Daniel said calmly, meeting Karen's hollow stare. "You were booked in seat 2A. I've corrected that. You're now assigned to the owner's suite." Maya stared at the pass. "I don't. It's a private cabin," he said. "Satellite uplink. Secure connection. You can consult with your team in London while we fly." Her eyes filled before she could stop them. The pressure, the fear, the rage of the last half hour crashed down all at once. "Thank you," she whispered. "Go," Daniel said gently. "Save that child." She didn't hesitate. She turned and ran down the jet bridge, boots striking metal, the sound echoing like a countdown finally reversed. Daniel watched her disappear. Then the warmth vanished from his face. He turned slowly back to Karen Holt. She stood rigid now, arms wrapped around herself, as if trying to hold her insides in. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, voice trembling. "I didn't know it was you. I was just following protocol." "Protocol," Daniel repeated. He tasted the word, let it sit. "I wrote the protocol." He stepped closer. The crowd leaned in. The silence pressed down, expectant. "Nowhere does it say to humiliate a paying passenger," he continued. Nowhere does it say to invent system errors. And nowhere does it say to decide who belongs based on how they look. He picked up the phone. Operations. I need the station manager at Gate B12. Bring human resources. Karen slid into the chair behind her without being told, her body giving up the fight before her mind could. Nobody boards yet, Daniel announced. We're going to have a conversation. Minutes later, the station manager arrived, out of breath, tie askew. Michael Barnes, 50 years old, career airline man. He took in the scene in one glance and went pale. Daniel didn't waste time. He pulled up a log on the screen. Lines of data scrolled past. Denied boardings. Dates. Reasons. This, Daniel said, pointing, is Karen Holt's activity over the last 6 months. 42 denied boardings. The average is 4. Barnes swallowed hard. Her efficiency metrics. Efficiency without humanity is abuse, Daniel cut in. And here's the part you missed. He zoomed in. Highlighted rows. 80% of those passengers were flying business or first class, Daniel said. And the majority were people of color. Karen shook her head, tears streaming now. It's the system. It flags them. I built the system, Daniel said sharply. It doesn't do that. He straightened. You didn't stop her because of policy. You stopped her because you decided she didn't belong. He turned back to the phone. Effective immediately, Karen Holt is relieved of duty for gross misconduct and discriminatory practices. Karen collapsed forward, sobbing. Michael Barnes, Daniel continued, you are suspended pending investigation. Barnes nodded mutely as security approached. Daniel typed one final command. The screen shifted from red to green. Boarding resumed. He stepped aside and watched as passengers filed past him. Quieter now, eyes meeting his, some nodding, some shaken. When the last person boarded, Daniel didn't turn toward first class. He walked down the aisle of economy, found row 45, seat C. He sat, buckled his belt. The plane pushed back. And somewhere over the Atlantic, the consequences were only beginning to take shape. The cabin lights dimmed as the aircraft climbed through a blanket of grey cloud, New York dissolving beneath them into a scatter of lights and memory. Daniel Whitmore leaned his head back against the narrow economy seat and closed his eyes. The seat pressed uncomfortably into his shoulders. The armrest dug into his ribs. Somewhere behind him, a baby cried without pause, raw and relentless. It was perfect. He breathed out slowly, the way he did after difficult board meetings, after decisions that couldn't be undone. Maya Reynolds was in the air. The clock was moving again. That was all that mattered. His phone vibrated in his hand. He opened one eye and glanced at the screen. A secure internal channel. From the flight deck. VIP update, the subject line read. Dr. Reynolds is settled in the owner's suite. She's currently in a live consult with London General. Connection is stable. We're cleared for a direct ascent. Estimated arrival reduced by 40 minutes. Daniel exhaled, the tension easing just a fraction. 40 minutes could be the difference between life and death in neurosurgery. He knew that. He'd watched surgeons race clocks more than once, standing behind glass walls while families prayed in waiting rooms that smelled of disinfectant and fear. He typed a short reply. Thank you. Maintain max allowable speed. The engine's steady roar filled the cabin, a deep mechanical promise. Daniel slipped the phone into his pocket and allowed himself to sit still for the first time in hours. Around him the mood was strange, quiet, but not peaceful. People whispered instead of spoke. A few passengers glanced his way, then looked quickly away, unsure whether to acknowledge him. He didn't blame them. Moments like the one at Gate B12 left ripples. People felt them long after the water looked calm. He reached into the seat pocket and pulled out the in-flight magazine. Didn't open it, just held it there, a familiar prop in an unfamiliar stillness. Another vibration. This time the number was unfamiliar. No name, no corporate identifier, just a string of digits. Daniel stared at it for a beat longer than necessary. Then he answered. Whitmore, he said quietly. You think firing her fixed it? A voice said. Male, distorted slightly, as if routed through layers of software. Controlled. You have no idea what was actually happening at that gate. Daniel straightened in his seat. The hum of the engines seemed to recede. Who is this? A friend, the voice said. Or maybe someone who doesn't want to die. A chill slid down Daniel's spine. What are you talking about? Check the cargo manifest for this flight, the voice said. Specifically, the diplomatic courier section. Do it now. The line went dead. Daniel didn't move for a moment. He sat there, phone pressed to his ear, eyes fixed on the seat back in front of him. The words replayed themselves, slotting into places his mind hadn't wanted to explore yet. Cargo manifest. Diplomatic courier. He opened his laptop on the narrow tray table, fingers already moving, logged into the airline's internal system. Security clearance requested. Granted. The manifest loaded slowly, lines of text scrolling down the screen. Standard baggage, mail, perishables, medical supplies. Then it appeared. One item, buried under a generic code. High priority, temperature controlled, exempt from scan. Daniel's fingers hovered over the trackpad. The authorization code blinked at the end of the line. Not Karen Holt's. Not Michael Barnes's. Executive override. Higher than station management. Higher than regional operations. His jaw tightened. He pulled up the authorization tree, tracing the digital fingerprint backward. Each click felt heavier than the last. The name surfaced with brutal clarity. Richard Vaughan, Vice Chairman, Board Member, old friend of his father. A man who liked to talk about efficiency and margins as if people were abstract variables. Daniel leaned back slowly, the weight of it pressing into his chest. Karen Holt hadn't just been profiling. She'd been stalling. She'd been trying to buy time. Why? Another vibration. The same unknown number. It's not just a box, the voice said as soon as Daniel answered. It's leverage. The man in seat 2B isn't a businessman. He's a broker. And he's watching your doctor very closely. Daniel's gaze snapped toward the front of the cabin. First class was separated by a thin curtain, but he could picture it easily. The wide seats, the polished wood, the illusion of safety. Seat 2. B. His pulse quickened. Why are you telling me this? There was a pause, long enough to feel deliberate. Because he told me if I didn't get him on this flight, he'd kill me, the voice said. Karen wasn't just a racist gate agent. She was terrified. She tried to delay Dr. Reynolds so he could board first and secure the case. The line went silent again. Daniel closed the laptop with care. His hands were steady, but only because he forced them to be. The pieces were locking into place now, forming a picture far uglier than he'd anticipated. He stood and moved down the aisle toward the rear galley, steps light, unhurried. The flight attendant, a young man named David, was organizing cups, his movements precise, almost nervous. "David," Daniel said softly. David startled, then straightened. "Yes, sir. I need access to the cockpit." David hesitated. "The captain has the no-entry sign on." "It's an audit," Daniel said. His tone left no room for debate. "Call the flight deck. Tell Captain Miller that Sierra 1 Actual is coming up." David's eyes widened slightly. He nodded and reached for the phone. 3 minutes later, Daniel was squeezing into the jump seat behind the pilots. The cockpit glowed with instrument lights, green and amber reflecting off focused faces. Captain Miller turned. "Mr. Whitmore, is everything all right?" "Pull up the cargo environmental controls," Daniel said. "Specifically the forward right pallet." The captain frowned but complied. The schematic filled the screen. Most of the cargo hold glowed green. One square pulsed blue. "That's odd," the first officer murmured. "That pallet's drawing auxiliary power." "Refrigeration set to 4 degrees. Biohazard flag." Daniel's stomach tightened. "What does the manifest say?" "Diplomatic medical supplies," the captain read. "Exempt from scan. Authorized by executive override." Daniel closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. When he opened them, his voice was calm. "Which executive?" The captain hesitated, then answered. "Code 5. 8-8. Richard Vaughan." Silence settled in the cockpit. The unknown voice echoed in Daniel's mind. Leverage. His phone buzzed again. A message this time. Unknown sender. It's a heart, genetically matched, for the diplomat's daughter. They're ransoming it. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. "They're holding a child hostage," he said quietly. The captain looked at him, understanding dawning. "What do you want to do?" Daniel's eyes hardened. "Lock the cockpit behind me. I'm going to have a conversation." He stepped back into the cabin, the lights warmer here, softer. In seat 2A, Maya Reynolds slept, her laptop open on her chest, medical charts frozen mid-scroll. She looked impossibly small in the wide seat, exhaustion finally claiming her. Daniel's gaze shifted to seat 2B. The man there wore a grey suit, expensive but unremarkable. He sipped bourbon, eyes on a tablet that reflected more of the cabin than the movie playing. One hand rested casually on a black briefcase wedged against his side, against regulations. Daniel walked past him toward the galley, deliberately brushing his shoulder. "Watch it," the man snapped, the politeness from the gate long gone. In that brief contact, Daniel felt it. Tension. Coiled muscle. and beneath the jacket, a hard, unmistakable shape. A holster. Daniel didn't look back. He reached the galley, heart pounding now. The game finally revealed. This wasn't just corporate rot. It was a crime flying at 35,000 feet. He typed a single reply to the unknown number. "I know who he is." The response came instantly. "Ask him about the red casket." Daniel slipped the phone away and turned, eyes locking onto the man in seat 2B. The engines droned on. Most of the cabin slept, but in the space between rows 2 and 3, a war had already begun. Daniel Whitmore didn't raise his voice when he sat down on the ottoman at the foot of seat 2B. He didn't ask permission either. He simply occupied the space, close enough that the man in the grey suit had to acknowledge him. The man paused the movie on his tablet. Ice clinked softly in his glass as he swirled the bourbon, an easy gesture meant to project calm. His eyes lifted, cool and measuring. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I believe economy is that way." Daniel leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. The cabin lighting cast soft shadows across his face, but his eyes were sharp, fully awake. "I have a question about your luggage," he said quietly. "Specifically the refrigerated crate in the hold. The one authorized under an executive override." The man's hand stilled. The bourbon stopped moving. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but it was enough. "I think you're confused," the man said after a beat. His voice was smooth now, stripped of irritation. Professional. "That cargo is diplomatic medical material. You don't have the clearance to discuss it." Daniel smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I own the plane," he said. "I own the fuel. And I know what the red casket is." The man's eyes hardened. The mask slipped just enough to reveal something cold beneath. He set the glass down carefully, the base touching the tray table without a sound. His fingers inched toward the briefcase at his side. "If you know what it is," he said, "then you know you should walk away." Daniel didn't move. "What is it?" he asked. The man's lips curved into something like a smile. "It's life," he whispered, "and it's death. It's a heart, genetically matched, perfectly viable, for a very important little girl." Daniel's jaw tightened. Across the aisle, Maya Reynolds slept on, unaware, her breathing shallow but steady. The implication hit him like a blow to the chest. "The diplomat's daughter," Daniel said. The man nodded. Her father didn't want to play ball. Trade negotiations stalled. "So we intercepted the donor organ. We're not stealing it. We're renting it. Ransoming it," Daniel said. "Tomato, tomato." The man leaned back, satisfied. "When we land in London, I make a call. If the papers are signed, the heart gets delivered. If not, the ice melts, the clock runs out, and your brilliant surgeon operates on a corpse." Daniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. "You won't get away with this." The man chuckled softly. "I already have. I have diplomatic immunity documents in this briefcase. If you call the authorities in London, the cargo gets tied up in red tape. 4 hours of viability, remember? Any delay, and the girl dies. You can't touch me without killing her." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The engines roared steadily, indifferent to the moral calculus unfolding above the Atlantic. Then Daniel stood. "You're right," he said. "I can't arrest you in London." The man relaxed, relief flickering across his features. "Smart choice. Art. But you made one mistake," Daniel continued, his voice flat. "You assumed we were going to London." Daniel turned and walked briskly toward the cockpit. The man's eyes widened. He stood abruptly, knocking his knee against the seat. "Whitmore," he hissed. "What are you doing?" Daniel didn't answer. He reached the cockpit door and knocked once, hard. Captain Miller turned as Daniel entered. "Sir." "Declare a medical emergency," Daniel said. "Pan, pan, pan." The captain blinked. "Who's sick?" "The cargo," Daniel replied. He pointed to the navigation display, tapping a tiny speck of land in the vast blue expanse. "We're diverting to Santa Maria." "Azores." The first officer stared. "That's a rock in the ocean." "It's a legal loophole," Daniel said. "Under Portuguese maritime law, an unscheduled landing for a biological hazard voids diplomatic courier immunity. The captain has authority to seize the cargo." Understanding snapped into place. The captain nodded. "I'll make the call." The aircraft banked left, a sudden shift that rippled through the cabin. Glasses tipped. A few passengers gasped awake. In seat 2B, the man staggered, bourbon sloshing over the rim of his glass. He looked down at his screen, saw the flight path changing, the line to London disappearing. "No," he whispered. Panic replaced composure. He lurched into the aisle. "You can't do this!" Daniel stepped out of the cockpit, blocking his path. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel announced, his voice carrying through first class, "we're making a brief detour. We have cargo that requires immediate attention and a passenger who's about to find himself in the wrong jurisdiction." The man reached inside his jacket. He didn't get far. Maya Reynolds was awake. She moved with instinct born of years in trauma rooms. Her hand shot out, gripping the man's wrist, twisting hard. He cried out as the weapon clattered to the floor. Maya drove him back into his seat, with a precision that spoke of anatomy studied in blood and bone. "Mr. Whitmore says, you have something that belongs to my patient," she hissed. Daniel kicked the briefcase away and pinned it under his foot. He looked down at the man, now pale, shaking. "Sit down," he said. "The police in Santa Maria are waiting." The plane descended through clouds, the lights of a small island appearing below like a scattered constellation. On the tarmac, blue lights flashed. The moment the wheels touched down, armed officers surrounded the aircraft. The cabin door opened to a rush of humid air and authority. "I have diplomatic status," the man shouted as officers seized him. "You can't touch me." "Not here," Daniel said, lifting the heavy red crate into his arms. "Here, you're just a smuggler." The man was dragged away, his protests swallowed by the night. Daniel handed the crate to Maya. 2 hours of viability, he said. "We refuel in 10 minutes. Then we go." 6 hours later, in a London operating theatre, a monitor beeped once, twice, then steadied into a strong, relentless rhythm. The heart was beating, and far above, the storm Daniel Whitmore had unleashed was only just beginning to break. Morning broke over London in a pale grey wash, the kind that softened edges without forgiving them. Daniel Whitmore stood behind the glass of the observation gallery, hands resting on the cold rail, watching Maya Reynolds move inside the operating theatre with a steadiness that bordered on reverence. The room was hushed, not silent. Machines breathed. A monitor pulsed green lines across a black field. Nurses exchanged tools with practiced efficiency, their eyes never leaving the field. Maya's shoulders were relaxed now, her movements economical, precise. The earlier panic burned down into focus. "Clamp released," a nurse said. Time stretched thin. A terrible, weightless second where the room seemed to hold its breath. Then the monitor answered. A thump. Another. Strong. Certain. The rhythm settled, confident enough to command belief. Maya lifted her eyes to the glass. She found Daniel instantly. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She simply nodded once. He exhaled. Long, controlled. A sound he hadn't realized he was holding back since New York. The child lived. The leverage had failed. The world, for one moment, had bent the right way. The diplomat stood beside him, a tall man with hands clasped so tightly his knuckles shone. Tears slid without shame down his cheeks. He didn't wipe them. He didn't have to. He turned toward Daniel, tried to speak, and couldn't. Daniel shook his head gently, cutting off gratitude before it could grow heavy. "Go be with your daughter," he said. Hours later, in the hospital cafeteria, Maya sat across from Daniel with a paper cup of tea cradled between her palms. The room smelled faintly of coffee and antiseptic. People moved around them in slow, exhausted arcs. "You make a terrible gate agent," she said quietly. Daniel almost laughed. "Almost. And you make a terrifying security guard." They sat with that for a moment. The adrenaline had burned off. What remained was something deeper, a shared understanding that what they'd interrupted was larger than one flight, one gate, one crime. Daniel's phone vibrated against the table. He didn't look at it right away. He already knew what it would say. When he did, the screen was a storm. News alerts stacked on top of each other. Videos from Gate B12 looped endlessly. Hashtags bloomed and spread, ugly and righteous in equal measure. Analysts debated his sanity. Commentators questioned his judgment. Stock tickers dipped, then wobbled. North Atlantic Air freezes transatlantic flight. CEO grounds plane. Fires employee live. Hero or reckless. Daniel closed the phone and slid it face down. "I should have seen it sooner," he said. "The complaints, the patterns. I let efficiency become camouflage." Maya watched him over the rim of her cup. "You saw it when it mattered." "That's not enough," he said. Back in New York, the reckoning had already begun. Richard Vaughan watched the morning news from his penthouse, espresso cooling in his hand as the anchor's voice cut through the room. Federal agents escorted men in suits through glass doors he recognized. His name scrolled along the bottom of the screen in clean, unforgiving text. Vice Chairman implicated in international organ trafficking ring. The cup slipped, shattered. Dark liquid bled into a pale rug. Across the city, in a small apartment with thin walls and furniture bought on credit, Karen Holt sat on her couch in the clothes she'd slept in. Her phone glowed in her hand, the volume turned down but not off. She watched herself on the screen, watched her own face twist, heard her own voice stripped of authority and laid bare. Comments poured in faster than she could read, some vicious, some cruelly accurate, some asking how many people she'd stopped, how many moments she'd stolen. She closed the app and stared at her reflection in the black screen. There was no one left to blame. At 30,000 feet over the Atlantic on a different flight, Daniel opened his laptop and began to type. To all employees, global distribution. He didn't rush. He chose words the way he chose routes through storms. Deliberate. Consequential. Tonight, I failed you. I failed to build a culture where dignity was non-negotiable. I allowed speed to outrank humanity. That ends now. Effective immediately, all boarding speed incentives are suspended. They will be replaced by a passenger dignity and equity index. We are not a conveyor belt. We are a bridge. If you cannot understand that, you cannot work here. I will be in seat 45C on most flights. If you want to talk, come find me. He sent it before doubt could soften it. The response was immediate. Messages flooded in, some fearful, some relieved. Some furious. He read them all. He always did. When the flight attendant reached his row with the cart, she stopped, hands trembling just slightly. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, voice low. "We have champagne in first class. I can bring some back." He shook his head. "Ginger ale would be great." She nodded, poured it carefully. As she handed it over, she met his eyes. "My brother," she said, then stopped, unsure. Daniel waited. "He gets treated like that," she finished. "All the time." Daniel took the cup. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have fixed this earlier." The plane hummed on. A baby cried. Someone snored. It was ordinary and imperfect and necessary. His phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. "You burned the wrong house. Check the cargo manifests for your other routes." Daniel stared at the message. The war he'd stepped into was wider than he'd thought. Deeper. Older. He looked out the window at the endless dark, the engine's lights reflecting faintly off cloud. There would be board meetings, lawsuits, headlines. There would be nights like this, heavy with consequences. He welcomed them, because somewhere in London, a heart beat on. And somewhere in New York, a gate stood quieter than it had the night before. Daniel Whitmore closed his eyes, already planning the work ahead, knowing with absolute certainty that power meant nothing if it wasn't used to dismantle the systems that fed on silence. The boardroom on the 38th floor overlooked the Hudson, glass walls framing the river like a promise of calm that no one inside felt. Daniel Whitmore stood at the head of the table, jacket off, sleeves rolled, hands resting flat on the polished surface. Around him sat 12 people who controlled billions of dollars, global routes, and the quiet machinery of influence. None of them spoke. They were waiting for him to blink. He didn't. "You grounded a transatlantic flight," one of them finally said. A woman with silver hair and a voice trained to sound reasonable while cutting deep. "On live cameras. You triggered a stock dip before, after hours even closed. Daniel nodded once. Yes. You exposed internal data, another added. Employee records. That opens us up to litigation. Yes. A man near the end leaned forward, fingers steepled. And you diverted an aircraft mid-flight without board approval. Daniel looked at him directly. I prevented a child from being murdered through bureaucratic delay. Silence fell again, thicker this time. The General Counsel cleared his throat. Interpol has confirmed the arrest in the Azores. The cargo seizure was legal. The courier is talking. Daniel's eyes flicked to the far end of the table. One chair sat empty. Richard Vaughan's chair. It had been left that way deliberately. The question, the silver-haired woman said, is whether you understand the precedent you've set. Daniel leaned forward. I understand exactly what I've set. He reached for the remote, and the wall screen came alive. Footage from Gate B12 froze mid-frame. Karen Holt's face twisted in disbelief. Maya Reynolds, standing rigid, fighting to stay composed. Phones raised in the background. This, Daniel said, is what happens when policy becomes an excuse. He clicked again. A spreadsheet filled the screen. Complaint logs. Patterns highlighted in red. These numbers have been here for years, he continued. We trained managers to reward speed. We told them delays were failure. So they cut corners. They profiled. They made judgment calls about who mattered. He let that sit. If you think the problem is that I exposed it, he said, then you're part of it. The room shifted. Someone exhaled sharply. Another looked down at their notes. What are you proposing? The silver-haired woman asked. A reset, Daniel said. Independent oversight. Mandatory bias audits. Real consequences. And board transparency, including you. A murmur ran the length of the table. You're asking us to vote against our own protection, the man at the end said. I'm asking you to protect the company by making it worth protecting, Daniel replied. The vote took 6 minutes. When it was over, Daniel walked out alone. In London, Maya Reynolds stood at a sink, scrubbing her hands long after the procedure had ended. Blood spiraled down the drain, diluted into something harmless. She stared at it, her reflection warped in stainless steel. A nurse touched her elbow gently. She's stable. Prognosis is good. Maya nodded. Her legs felt hollow. She dried her hands and stepped into the corridor, where the diplomat waited. He reached for her, then stopped, unsure. You saved her, he said. Maya shook her head. A lot of people did. Later, in her hotel room, she sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand. Missed calls, messages from colleagues, from her mother, from numbers she didn't recognize. One text stood out. Daniel Whitmore. Thank you for trusting me. If you're willing, I'd like to talk when you're rested. She stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed back. Tomorrow. Hospital cafeteria. Noon. Back in New York, Karen Holt woke to a knock on her door that sounded like finality. She opened it to find a union representative and a courier with a thick envelope. Severance denial, termination for cause, a notice of pending investigation into potential criminal liability. Her knees buckled. She slid down the doorframe and sat on the floor, papers scattered around her like leaves. She thought of the nights she'd gone home exhausted but satisfied. Planes on time, metrics green, managers nodding approval. She thought of the faces she'd dismissed. She buried her face in her hands and cried until there was nothing left to cry out. On a quiet street in Queens, a man watched the news from his car. Engine off, window cracked. He typed on his phone, deleted the message, then typed again. "You were right. It's bigger. Be careful." He sent it to Daniel, then drove away. The next morning, the hospital cafeteria smelled like burnt coffee and toast. Maya sat at a corner table, hair pulled back, eyes tired but clear. Daniel arrived without entourage, without ceremony. He carried 2 cups. "Decaf," he said, sliding one toward her. She smiled faintly. "You remembered." They sat. Around them, doctors moved with purpose. Life continued. "They're going to fight you," Maya said. Daniel nodded. "They already are." "Good," she said. "So will you." He studied her. The steadiness, the absence of awe. "I want you to help me," he said. "Not as a symbol, as a surgeon who understands systems that fail under pressure." She raised an eyebrow. "You're asking me to leave my practice? I'm asking you to help me rewrite policy so doctors don't have to fight gate agents to save lives." Maya looked down at her hands, thought of the child upstairs, of the thin line between chaos and order. "I won't be quiet," she said. Daniel smiled. "I'd be disappointed if you were." Across the Atlantic, in a holding cell that smelled of bleach and regret, the broker stared at the wall and started to talk. Names surfaced, routes, dates, patterns that mirrored the ones Daniel had seen before, only darker, older. The web tightened, and as the sun rose over different cities, people who had never heard of Gate B12 felt something shift. A story traveled, not just of a CEO and a surgeon, but of a system that had been interrupted. For the first time in a long while, interruption felt like progress. The subpoena arrived before the coffee finished brewing. Daniel Whitmore stood in his kitchen, Manhattan still half asleep beyond the glass, the envelope heavy in his hand. Federal seal, formal language, polite threat. He read it once, then again, not because he needed clarity, but because the weight of it deserved respect. This was the part no one filmed. No applause, no gasps, just paper and consequence. He set it down beside the mug and opened his laptop. By noon, the board had fractured into camps. Some spoke of loyalty, others of liability. A few tried to sound moral now that the ground had shifted beneath them. Daniel listened, took notes, said very little. Silence, he'd learned, made people reveal themselves faster than confrontation ever could. In a windowless office across town, federal investigators played the same footage on loop. Gate B12, the override, the reveal. They paused on Karen Holt's face, then on Daniel's. The questions were not whether he'd broken rules. It was which rules mattered when the system itself had been weaponized. In London, Maya Reynolds walked the pediatric ward with a clipboard tucked under her arm, stopping at each room with the same careful attention. The girl slept now, Color returned to her cheeks, chest rising in a steady rhythm that felt like a miracle, only when you let yourself feel it. Maya didn't. Not yet. She'd learned long ago that miracles demanded maintenance. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A news alert. North Atlantic Air, CEO, faces congressional inquiry. She exhaled slowly and slipped the phone away. Later, in a quiet corridor, the diplomat caught up with her. He looked older than he had days before. Relief did that sometimes. It carved lines where fear had been. "They're calling you a hero," he said. Maya shook her head. "They're calling a story a hero. That's not the same thing." "Still," he said, "my daughter will grow up because of you." Maya stopped walking. She met his eyes. "She'll grow up because a lot of people finally did the right thing at the same time." Back in New York, Daniel sat across from the House Committee, hands folded, posture easy but alert. The room buzzed with low voices and shuffling papers. Cameras stared from every angle. A man with a practiced smile leaned toward the microphone. "Mr. Whitmore," he began, "do you believe you're above the law?" Daniel looked at him steadily. "No," he said. "I believe the law is above convenience." A murmur rippled through the room. "You unilaterally grounded an aircraft," the man continued. "You exposed employee data. You diverted a flight internationally." "Yes," Daniel said. "To prevent extortion, murder, and the abuse of authority." Another member leaned in. "Do you regret your actions?" Daniel paused. The room leaned with him. "I regret that it took a dying child to force the issue." Outside, protesters gathered. Some carried signs praising him. Others demanded his resignation. Both groups shouted. Daniel heard none of it from inside the hearing room. He was already thinking 10 steps ahead. In Queens, the man who'd warned him sat in a diner nursing a cup of coffee gone cold. He watched the hearing on a muted television mounted above the counter. When Daniel spoke, the man nodded once, almost imperceptibly. He pulled a folded note from his jacket and slid it to the waitress. "Give this to the detective who comes by," he said. "He'll know." The note held a name, a route, a date, another thread. At North Atlantic headquarters, the new interim compliance team worked through the night. Files were opened, patterns mapped, names highlighted. The Arot wasn't confined to one gate or one region. It had been rewarded too long, hidden behind acronyms and quarterly targets. By dawn, 3 managers had resigned. 2 more were escorted out. The emails Daniel had sent weeks earlier were forwarded, reread, quoted like scripture by people who'd ignored them when they were inconvenient. In a small office overlooking the East River, Maya sat across from Daniel again, this time with binders spread between them. Charts, policies, flow diagrams. "This is where it breaks," she said, tapping a page. "Here, the handoff between urgency and authority. You let people with no clinical understanding decide what counts as an emergency." Daniel nodded. "We'll change that. You'll get pushback." "I already have." She looked at him. Really looked this time. The lines of fatigue, the control, the stubborn refusal to be liked at the expense of being right. "You know this won't end with policy," she said. "It ends with culture, and culture hates being told what it is." Daniel allowed himself a thin smile. "Good. I've always preferred a fight that matters." Across the ocean, in a detention facility that hummed with fluorescent light, Richard Vaughan stared at a wall he could not buy his way past. The broker had talked. The manifests matched. The routes told a story that spreadsheets never could. Vaughan's phone privileges were revoked. His lawyers stopped returning calls. The machine he'd relied on had turned. At gate B12, the counter had been repainted, the carpet replaced. A new sign stood where Karen Holt once had. It read, in plain language, "If you need help, ask. No judgments, no assumptions." A young gate agent scanned a boarding pass for a woman in a worn coat carrying a violin case. The scan beeped green. The agent smiled. "Welcome aboard," she said, and meant it. On a late flight back to New York, Daniel took seat 45C again. No cameras this time, just the low murmur of travelers and the steady promise of engines. A man across the aisle recognized him, hesitated, then nodded. Daniel nodded back. That was enough. His phone buzzed. A message from Maya. The girl asked when she can fly again. Daniel smiled, a real one this time. He typed back, "Whenever she wants, she'll always have a seat." As the plane lifted, the city fell away, and somewhere between ground and sky, a system that had thrived on silence felt the pressure of being seen. The call came at 2:47 in the morning. Daniel Whitmore was awake before the phone finished vibrating, mind already moving, already braced. He answered without looking at the screen. "Tell me," he said. "It's Vaughan," the voice on the other end said. "A senior federal investigator. Hoarse. Tired. He's not the top. He's not even close." Daniel sat up, feet touching the cold floor. Manhattan lay dark outside the window, the river a dull ribbon of black. "I know," he said. "Who is?" A pause. Papers shifting. The board didn't just look the other way. Some of them funded it. Shell non-profits, medical logistics charities. They used your airline because you kept it clean enough to trust. Daniel closed his eyes. The betrayal didn't sting the way it once might have. It landed with weight, yes, but also with clarity. How many routes? "Enough," the investigator said. "Enough to make this bigger than aviation." Daniel exhaled slowly. "You'll have what you need." When the call ended, he stayed seated on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, staring at nothing. This was the cost of pulling a thread all the way out. You didn't get to choose what unraveled with it. By sunrise, his inbox was a war zone. Resignations, denials, legal positioning disguised as moral outrage. A carefully worded letter from a board member who had once toasted him as the future of ethical leadership. He didn't respond. Instead, he called Maya. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was calm, awake. I was already up. "They're going to widen the net," he said. "It's going to get ugly." "It already is," she replied. "That's not the same thing." There was a brief silence between them, the kind that only existed when both people understood the stakes. "Are you still in?" Daniel asked. "Yes," she said, without hesitation. "But we do it right. No optics, no heroes." Daniel nodded, even though she couldn't see him. Agreed. The press conference was scheduled for noon. By 11:30, the plaza outside headquarters was packed. Reporters, protesters, employees watching from behind glass walls. Daniel stood in a small side room with Maya, both of them flanked by legal counsel who knew better than to interrupt. "You don't have to do this," one of them said quietly. "You can let the investigation speak for itself." Daniel shook his head. "Silence is how this started." Maya adjusted the microphone on her jacket, expression unreadable. "People need to hear what accountability sounds like," she said. They walked out together. The noise hit them like heat. Shouts, questions, flashing lights. Daniel stepped forward, waited, raised a hand. The crowd stilled. "My name is Daniel Whitmore," he said, "and I am the Chief Executive Officer of North Atlantic Air. I am also the person responsible for allowing systems to exist that prioritized speed over dignity." The words were simple. They landed hard. "I cannot undo what has already happened," he continued, "but I can stop pretending it was an anomaly." He gestured toward Maya. "Dr. Maya Reynolds represents what our systems failed to protect. Urgency, expertise, humanity. She should never have had to fight for access to do her job." Maya stepped forward, voice steady. "This is not about one flight," she said. "It's about how often expertise is dismissed because it doesn't look the way power expects it to." Questions exploded. Daniel answered some, ignored others. When asked if he would resign, he didn't hesitate. "No," he said, "I will not abandon the work because it's uncomfortable." Inside the building, several board members watched the feed in silence. One of them reached for his phone, stopped, then lowered his hand. The calculus had changed. Survival now meant cooperation. By evening, federal warrants were executed quietly, offices emptied, accounts frozen. Names that had once commanded respect were reduced to case numbers. In London, Maya returned to the ward. The girl was awake, sitting up, color bright in her cheeks. She grinned when she saw Maya. "My dad says I have a special heart," she said. Maya smiled back. "You do." "Can I fly again?" the girl asked. Maya hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. And when you do, you won't have to prove you belong." The girl seemed satisfied with that. Back in New York, Daniel sat alone in his office long after the building emptied. The city glowed beyond the windows, indifferent and alive. He scrolled through internal reports, each one another reminder of how easily harm could be normalized. His phone buzzed. "Unknown number. You still don't know how deep this goes." Daniel stared at the message, then typed back. "Then tell me." The response came slower this time. "Cargo isn't the only leverage. Watch your loyalty programs. Watch who gets flagged. Watch who doesn't." Daniel felt a familiar tightening in his chest. The fight was mutating, expanding. He forwarded the message to compliance. to federal contacts. To Maya, her reply was immediate. Good. Then we keep going. Days later, as another flight lifted off from JFK, Gate B12 hummed with quiet efficiency. A gate agent scanned passes, offering smiles that reached her eyes. An older couple struggled with a bag, and a nearby passenger stepped in to help without being asked. No cameras, no applause, just motion done right. Daniel watched from a distance, hands in his pockets, unremarkable among the travelers. He didn't intervene. He didn't need to. The system, for once, was doing what it was meant to do. For now. He turned and walked toward his own gate, knowing the work ahead would be relentless, knowing the resistance would be clever, knowing the cost would be personal. And still, he walked forward. Because once you saw how the machine really worked, you didn't get to pretend you didn't hear it grinding people down. Not anymore. The vote came in at dawn, quiet and irrevocable. Daniel Whitmore watched the secure feed from his office as the final tally locked into place. 7 in favor, 2 abstentions, 1 furious resignation submitted 30 seconds too late to matter. Emergency restructuring approved. Independent federal oversight installed. Board authority temporarily suspended, pending criminal review. He closed the feed and sat back, the chair creaking softly beneath him. Power rarely fell all at once. It eroded, then collapsed, and people pretended they hadn't felt the ground give way until they were already falling. His phone rang. Not a secure line this time. Not a lawyer. Maya. They raided the foundation offices, she said. The ones funding the medical logistics programs. Daniel nodded, though she couldn't see him. They'll find what they're looking for. They already did, she replied. Records, cold storage contracts, priority routing under humanitarian codes. Daniel closed his eyes. The picture was complete now. Not just organs, access, preference, who moved faster through the world, and who was made to wait. I'm coming back to New York, Maya said. We need to talk about what comes next. Agreed, Daniel said. But be careful. I'm a surgeon, she replied. Careful is my job. 2 days later, the indictment dropped. It was thick, dense. Names that once opened doors now sealed them shut. Richard Vaughan's wasn't the only one. 2 former board members, a regional director, 3 logistics partners. The charges read like a map of moral compromise drawn in legal ink. News outlets framed it as a reckoning. Daniel read none of it. He watched the internal reactions instead. Employees walking slower through halls that had once rewarded speed. Managers rereading policies as if seeing them for the first time. People asking questions they had been trained not to ask. At a regional hub in the Midwest, a supervisor pulled a junior agent aside after a boarding delay and said, "Take the time you need." The words felt strange in his mouth. Necessary. At another airport, a passenger missed a connection due to a medical emergency being prioritized. She was angry, loud. The agent listened, explained, didn't flinch. The passenger left furious. The child on the stretcher didn't die. These were the moments Daniel measured now. Not headlines, not stock recovery curves. In Washington, the hearings resumed. A senator leaned toward the microphone. Mr. Whitmore, do you accept responsibility for what occurred under your leadership? Yes, Daniel said, without qualification. Then why should you remain in charge? Daniel looked out across the room. Cameras, faces, some skeptical, some hopeful. Because removing the person who pulled the curtain doesn't fix what was hidden behind it, he said. It just teaches the next person to keep it closed. There were no applause lines, just the quiet sound of pens moving across paper. In London, Maya Reynolds packed her office, not abandoning it, reconfiguring her life around something larger than one operating room. She ran her fingers along the spine of a medical textbook she'd carried for years, then slid it into a box labeled later. Her phone buzzed. A message from the girl's father. A photo. The child sitting up, grinning. A stuffed airplane tucked under her arm. First flight booked, the message read. Maya smiled despite herself. Back in New York, Karen Holt's name appeared again, briefly, in a local court docket. Not as a defendant, as a witness. Her testimony was short, halting, unadorned. She spoke about metrics, about pressure, about fear. She didn't excuse herself. She didn't ask forgiveness. When she left the courtroom, no one followed her. No cameras. Just the quiet echo of shoes on tile. Daniel watched the transcript later that night. He didn't feel satisfaction. He felt gravity. Maya arrived in New York under a low, colorless sky. She met Daniel not at headquarters, but in a small conference room above a maintenance hangar. No glass walls, no press. Just metal chairs and the smell of oil and coffee. "You're building safeguards," she said, after reviewing the documents spread between them. "But safeguards assume people will follow them." Daniel nodded. "So we build consequences. And education," she added. "You can't just punish behavior you never taught people to recognize." He studied her for a moment. "You're asking to overhaul training across the entire system." "I'm asking to redefine competence," Maya said. "Technical skill without ethical judgment is malpractice. In medicine and in aviation." Daniel leaned back, considering. "Then we do it together." They worked until midnight, mapping scenarios, red lines, authority pathways that couldn't be overridden by impatience or prejudice. The work was slow, intentionally so. Outside, planes took off and landed in steady rhythm, unaware of the quiet rewriting happening below them. The following week, North Atlantic Air released its new standards. Not in a glossy campaign. In plain language. Internal first. Public second. The message was clear. If dignity slowed operations, dignity won. Critics scoffed. Analysts predicted dools. A few competitors mocked the approach behind closed doors. Then came the numbers no one had anticipated. Complaints dropped. Not the loud ones, the quiet ones, the ones that never made it to social media because they'd been handled before harm calcified. Daniel sat in seat 45C again on a late flight, watching a gate agent kneel to eye level with an elderly man confused about his boarding group. She explained patiently. He smiled, relieved. The line moved on. His phone buzzed. Maya. She sent a photo, a classroom. Whiteboard filled with flowcharts. A group of agents leaning forward, listening. "First session done," she wrote. "They're asking better questions already." Daniel typed back. "Good. That means it's working." As the plane climbed, he looked out at the lights below. Each one a story intersecting briefly with the systems he helped shape. He knew the fight wasn't over. It would never be over. Systems learned. They adapted. So did people who benefited from their blind spots. But something fundamental had shifted. Not the absence of injustice, the refusal to normalize it. Daniel closed his eyes, the engine's hum steady beneath him, and allowed himself one rare, quiet certainty. This time, the machine had noticed it was being watched. The first flight under the new standards departed without ceremony. No ribbon cutting, no speeches. Just a gate agent scanning passes, pausing when a nervous young mother fumbled for documents, waiting instead of rushing, meeting her eyes and saying, "Take your time." The line moved slower. No one complained. The plane left 2 minutes late. It arrived with everyone intact. Daniel Whitmore watched from a distance, hands in his coat pockets, indistinguishable from any other traveler killing time before boarding. The screens above the gate flickered with routine information. Nothing dramatic, nothing viral. That was the point. Across the terminal, Maya Reynolds stood near a coffee kiosk, reviewing notes on her tablet. Not medical charts this time. Training feedback, incident reviews, language patterns agents struggled with, places where old habits still tried to resurface. She marked them carefully, the way she once marked surgical margins, knowing exactly where mistakes liked to hide. "Ready," Daniel said quietly, coming up beside her. She nodded. For the next version, not the last. They walked together toward the concourse, two people bound not by heroism, but by responsibility. Around them, the airport breathed. Rolling suitcases, overhead announcements, lives intersecting for minutes, sometimes seconds, before moving on. This was the machinery they had chosen to step inside instead of ruling from above. In a quiet office far from the gates, a compliance analyst flagged an anomaly and didn't dismiss it. She escalated. The system responded. Somewhere else, a manager did the math and realized the incentives had truly changed. Speed no longer erased scrutiny. Silence no longer protected anyone. News cycles moved on, as they always did. Another outrage replaced the last. Daniel stopped being a headline and became what he preferred to be again. A decision-maker whose name didn't matter as much as the outcome. Stock stabilized. Lawsuits settled. A few quietly disappeared into sealed records and federal custody. Karen Holt found work at a grocery store near her apartment. It wasn't glamorous. It paid the rent. She learned the names of regular customers, learned patience the hard way. Some nights, she replayed Gate B12 in her mind, the moment before everything shattered. She didn't look away anymore. In London, a little girl ran down a hospital corridor, clutching a plastic airplane, her laugh echoing off white walls. Her heart beat strong and unremarkable, exactly the way it was supposed to. Her father watched her go, knowing the world had come terrifyingly close to deciding she was expendable. On a late flight out of Chicago, Daniel took seat 45C again. the armrest still dug into his side. The baby 2 rows back still cried. The flight attendant still offered champagne. He declined. Ginger ale arrived lukewarm. It tasted fine. As the plane taxied, a man across the aisle leaned over. "Hey," he said, tentative. "What you did, it mattered." Daniel met his eyes. "What we're doing," he corrected gently. The engines roared. The ground fell away. Another journey began, unremarkable and essential. Somewhere between ascent and cruise, Daniel opened his laptop and read a message from Maya. "New cohort starts next week. Different airport, same problems, same resolve." He closed the screen and looked out at the clouds, knowing the work would never be finished, only continued. Power didn't redeem itself through moments. It redeemed itself through habits. The most valuable cargo on any plane was never locked in a refrigerated crate or hidden behind executive codes. It sat upright, buckled in, breathing, trusting a system they rarely thought about unless it failed. This story didn't end with applause or absolution. It ended with vigilance, with people choosing again and again not to look away. If this story stayed with you, tap like. Subscribe for more stories that matter. And in the comments, share 3 words that define dignity now.